Welcome to another Combat Mission Battle for Normandy video. Today we're taking a look at round 1 of the Utah Beach tournament again, but this time I'm playing as the German side of the mirror match. If you haven't checked it out yet, you can find the video of me playing as the Americans already up on my channel. The scenario is a loosely historical version of the battle for Carentan. In this version, a lightly damaged battalion of American paratroopers backed by a platoon of Shermans is attacking into a depleted German company at around 60% strength. The Germans do not start with any armor, but at 5, 10, and 15 minutes into the battle, they will gain an armored car, a Panzer IV, and a Stug as reinforcements. But overall, the American force is significantly more powerful, and the Germans have a very hard fight in front of them. Let's take a look at my initial positions. I don't have a whole lot of units to work with, so I've tried to place one platoon on each of the objectives. Here I have the hospital. You'll notice that I have not occupied the outermost building. I know the US has a terrifying amount of firepower, so I'm trying to keep my units back so that they can't be subjected to all of that firepower at once. I'll engage once the Americans have taken the outer row of buildings. Moving towards the central area with the cathedral, I have a decent amount of units in the cathedral itself, mostly towards the upper levels, so they have some good line of sight, do some spotting for me. Other than that, once again, I've occupied the inner buildings, and I'm leaving the outer buildings unoccupied. And then shifting over to the Carentan Square itself, same exact idea. I've got some units, including an MG42, watching the road heading up towards the square, but everyone else is in positions where they can move either to the left or to the right, depending on where the Americans attack from. Then to cover off the road at the end, I have just a light machine gun that is set up to cover that one approach. I don't expect my opponent to make a push up there, but if he does, there's a machine gun waiting for him. Turn 1 starts exactly how I expected it to, with a heavy artillery barrage coming down. Looks like it's the 81mm mortars down onto the hospital and the 105mm guns onto the buildings near Carentan Square. All of my infantry are in the lower floors, given a little bit more protection from artillery hitting the roof. I do take some casualties and some wounds, but it's nothing excessive. I also start to get a couple spots of some American units. As turn 2 opens up, the artillery is still continuing to come down. My infantry up in the top of the church tower, the MG42 team, makes a spot over on the opposite side of the map and starts to put some fire in their direction. However, this does reveal their position, and a whole bunch of infantry from another direction starts to return fire. And naturally, they are going to kill the gunner first. So it'll take a little bit for someone else to grab the gun. Taking another view of the action, there are American infantry starting to run across the little open space into the outer ring of buildings in the city. Opponent definitely a little bit more aggressive than I was. When I did this scenario, I held out in those buildings for a couple turns to see if there are any German defenders. My opponent here, as the attacker, is just going to start running directly across that street. And I do get a little bit of fire on his troops, but I don't see a lot of casualties. So here's a good example of what I was trying to do with my setup. Instead of taking the Americans and the outer row of buildings, I've deployed in the inner row, and I can start concentrating fire on smaller portions of their force as they approach me. Exactly like is happening right here. 3 squads are going to fire at this one American squad as they try to move in to get in position. Back on the left flank, a grenade manages to take out a building that had been weakened by artillery fire, while an MG42 kills a couple American infantry. But that is not the end of the American infantry coming through this little alleyway, as moments later, a few more appear. Unfortunately, the MG42s are reloading, so they're not able to shoot right away, but as soon as they are finished reloading, they open fire again and take down 2 more American infantry. In the same general area there, where we were just looking was the upper right. We can see more Americans are getting into the outer buildings, and an artillery shell takes out a few of my defenders in a building a little bit farther back. And here we have that gap where we saw American infantry streaming across, and here they come. Another wave of infantry running across, taking a little bit of fire from the hospital direction, but it's not particularly effective at this range. Not really pinning them or getting any kills, but that is definitely a lot of infantry streaming across. Oh, we see one go down right there. But yeah, lots of infantry making it across. I'm guessing it's most of a company, and there we have a Sherman driving away as well. And let's take a look at where all those infantry went. So if you remember from my attack video, I had a lot of trouble in this little section here, and the same thing is going to happen to my opponent. We're going to see his infantry come up the road, run around the wall, and as they do so, they run right into the waiting guns of some infantry. And a good chunk of them are going to get gunned down as they try to get into the buildings. I do start to take some casualties as the Americans start firing back, just because there's so many of them compared to my, I think I had 2 or 3 squads broken up into their pieces spread out across here. So not a lot of Germans and a whole ton of Americans come running into the buildings, and they definitely get fire superiority on me pretty quick. Aside from the heavy artillery bombardment, the hospital has been relatively quiet, except a wall has been blown and now a Sherman has appeared and is starting to fire on my forces. Back into that little middle section, more American troops have piled in, and my defenders are still returning fire. MG42s making pretty good work of Americans in the buildings. Over on the left there, more Americans trying to cross that courtyard and running into a squad armed with an MG42. So as the Americans are coming around that wall, they're getting shot. And now they've actually started to break and are running. Morale problems early on for my opponent with this very aggressive charge. The shots you see coming from the middle are from the church tower. So the MG42 up there has a new gunner, and that big swarm of Americans there, unfortunately, are going to go by while it's reloading. But it does get its reload in and resumes firing shortly after, getting another squad caught out in the open. The Sherman at the hospital is going to be a bit of a problem for me, but I do have a Panzerschreck nearby. I do lose 3 members of a squad to a shell, as the Panzerschreck is taking aim, and it just misses. Unfortunately, Panzerschrecks are loud and noisy, and they put out a lot of smoke, so that squad is going to get spotted pretty much immediately. Some infantry are going to open fire on them as they try to reload, and then, unfortunately, the Sherman itself is going to make the spot and hit them with a take shell. Back into the middle section. Looks like there's approximately an entire American platoon taking position in the one building there, opposed by a couple squads of Germans. Once again, that MG42 up in the church tower, you can see shooting down periodically as it's making some spots. The artillery is still coming down pretty heavily, even 6 minutes into the game. That big mass of American troops seems to be struggling a little bit. I have enough machine gun fire on them that it's keeping quite a few of them pinned. He would have been much better off taking more buildings and spreading out a bit more, so I couldn't pin such a large force with a minimal amount of fire. If I had to pin 2 or 3 buildings instead of 1, it would be a lot more difficult for me. And over towards Carentan Square, little engagement happening, building to building across the street. Do lose a man, but the MG42 does a pretty good job of keeping the Americans back. However, immediately after that, an American squad is going to run right up the middle of the road, and multiple MG42s, including the big tripod-mounted one, are going to open up on them and just absolutely shred this squad. And the squad that I was engaged with across the buildings suddenly decides to leave the building. I don't know if they have been given an order for that, or if their morale is breaking and they're trying to flee, but they also are going to enter the street and suffer a similar fate to the other squad. Okay, given that I massacred a squad in the courtyard over on the far left here, my opponent has now sent in 2 Shermans. They are going to do a very good job of taking out my squad in the building on the side. However, they are dangerously close to Panzerfaust range, so hopefully I can get a shot if they move up, which is going to happen over on a side street. So this is even farther left, heading towards Carentan Square, where I get a Panzerfaust shot into the side armor of a Sherman. And at first, I did not know if this tank was taken out. It does stop moving. The turret's not swinging around, so it's not searching for targets. And eventually, the hatch opens, and a crew member, just one, is going to step out. He is going to start firing on my troops. However, he does get spotted shortly after, and is going to get taken out. Valiant effort, though. And finally, my reinforcement. My armored car, armed with a 20mm, has shown up, and I immediately throw it into action. Driving across towards my left flank, where it shoots an American out in the street, and then catches sight of the rest of the squad, and fires at some more of them. So this little guy is going to be very useful in handling any infantry that tries to sneak up this left side. Bit of a wider angle of that middle engagement, which is still going on. Just a ton of firepower going back and forth. The MG42 up in the tower doing a fantastic job of putting fire into the lower floor. Up over onto that left area again, the Sherman has moved forward exactly like I hoped it would, and one of my squads inside does have Panzerfausts, and they're going to get a shot off, which triggers the ammo, and the whole tank goes up in a big ball of fire. Back to our little grenaded out building here. It's been quiet for a few turns, but it appears the American squad has taken up position and started a bit of a firefight with one German squad split into 2 pieces. So back where I just destroyed that Sherman, more fire coming in on the squads. The one breaks and is panicking, probably because the other Sherman is firing its machine guns. However, American squad is going to try and get through the buildings to the side, and one man with an MP40 is going to shoot 2, then 3. Unfortunately, doesn't get the 4th, goes down himself, but that is 3 kills for one guy with an MP40. No big surprise, but the engagement in the middle section is still ongoing. However, there are a lot of Americans on the ground, and I don't know if they are dead or pinned. But the volume of fire coming out of them seems to be decreasing quite significantly, and I can see at least a few casualties occurring. Bit of a wider angle of the same engagement. At one point, I actually lose sight of everything inside the large building, and my machine gunner in the tower actually picks a new target. Over at the hospital, the Americans are making an attempt to get inside. I believe my opponent made the same mistake I did and did not realize there were no doors. And he's trying to get in, and his troops are just running around the side of the building and getting gunned down as they do. I retreated back my armored car a little bit. A lot of the American squads have bazookas, and I don't want it getting too close and getting hit with one. So it backed up the street a little bit and is continuing to support my infantry. And still artillery coming down 9 minutes in. The barrage is ongoing. Hopefully he runs out of ammo soon. Here we see 1 kill, 2 kills, 3 kills, and a 4th kill, all from one MG42 gunner. Absolute hero there, dropping most of the squad. And finally, another look back at the hospital on the stern. The Americans have made it into the outermost section of buildings, which is okay. I left it empty for them. And now I have them where I wanted to engage them. Shorter range, and they're in pieces because they've been running up and taking multiple buildings. so hopefully that means I am more concentrated than they are. And here's some running, which means they are continuing to have morale problems. The armored car is going to continue pounding the building with some Americans in it, and they are going to start fleeing. Once again, I don't know if this was an order to reposition them or if they've actually broken morale. And back to the hospital side, a Sherman is working to suppress some of my infantry, which is going to be a problem. However, more American soldiers come pouring around the corner, right into my little kill zone in the courtyard. And more of them are going to get shot, and you can see a whole bunch turning and running. So I definitely believe the American forces are having morale issues. 10 turns in, so I'm feeling pretty good about this so far. And he's going to make another attempt to storm the hospital, this time coming from the opposite side with what looks like a full squad. They are going to meet pretty much the same fate as all the other squads and just get gunned down by a mass amount of machine gun fire. Some of them do make it into the building this time, and they do manage to kill a couple of my troops that were in the middle building. You can see they have broken, and the last remaining guy is fleeing. Over on my far left flank, even with the armored car there providing support, I'm still having trouble holding it. There's just too many Americans and not enough Germans. One squad section goes down, the next squad section breaks and then gets killed as well, leaving just a 3-man team holding that entire side. Over into Carentan Square itself, the Americans are trying to push into the square. However, they're going to exit this building and get torn to pieces by machine gun fire. I'm not sure if my opponent was missing where the doors were in these buildings, because a lot of them didn't have doors on both sides, so if you gave an order to move to a different building, they would sometimes have to exit the building to run in the door of the other. There were no internal doors or back doors. So we've already seen one squad run out, and now we see a second squad starting to run out and getting shot as they come through the doorway. And then, finally, right as the turn is about to end, a third squad starts to run out, but they are saved by the time. One of the Shermans has moved up a little bit, so I have a Panzerschreck. You can't see him behind the tree. You can just see his icon, but he was trying to get an angle on the Sherman. I don't know if it was luck or if my opponent saw it, but he's backing the Sherman away before the Panzerschreck could get on target. Over on the left, you're going to see that I've started to call in an artillery strike with my mortars onto the building occupied by Germans, and a spotting round, of course, lands directly on a building and kills a couple of my own soldiers. However, my Panzer IV has arrived. Seems like a lot of the Americans in the central area have thinned out, not really getting many spots over on the left, and the large building is quite suppressed. However, I do get another spotting round, which lands pretty much on target, so hoping for the fire for effect. Back in Carentan Square, the piles of Americans lining the streets. Unfortunately, a Sherman is going to show up the road, which is definitely not what I was hoping for. A few more Americans trying to change buildings are going to get destroyed quite quickly. However, that is just revealing the positions of my troops for the Sherman. I'm going to have to back a lot of these infantry out of the position at the end of the square there, because they do not have any way to deal with that Sherman. I'm pretty confident in my ability to hold the cathedral and the hospital at this point. However, Carentan Square itself is looking increasingly bad. Between the Americans taking most of the buildings on my left flank and now 2 Shermans rolling up into the square, the situation is rapidly degrading for my units. I do have the Panzer IV heading up the street. You can see it on the left moving across, but it's going to have a hard time getting in there to engage the Shermans without getting hit first. So with the situation looking increasingly bad in Carentan Square, my MG42 is going to pack up and run to a different building. My Panzer IV does catch sight of some Americans on the other side of the square and start firing at some infantry, so at least it's going to help prevent any infantry from approaching, but those two Shermans are still going to be a problem for me. You can see in the bottom right, I am bringing over a Panzerschreck. This is the one that was over by the hospital, so trying to position them over so they can help out with those Shermans if they can get a shot on them. And after 10 minutes of being pounded by enemy artillery, my own mortars finally coming in, starting to get some shells on target, hitting those two buildings where all the Americans were. So hopefully if there's any stragglers in there, this will finish them off. Carentan Square has turned into a bit of a stalemate. The Shermans aren't advancing. They're kind of running out of targets because I've moved my troops to the sides where they're not in line of sight. My Panzer IV can't really make any approaches. The Panzerschreck is moving up. But then my opponent starts reversing the Shermans out. And both Shermans this turn are going to back off. And then as they back off, infantry starts coming out. He may have thought that he had taken out most of my troops and not realized that I had moved them to the sides where the tanks couldn't see. Because as soon as that infantry comes out, they're going to start taking machine gun fire from my squads on the sides. And in the background, you can see my mortars continuing to come down, just smashing that entire area. When you split squads, sometimes both halves don't end up with Panzerfausts, in particular if the squad only has one. Obviously one half is going to get it and not the other half, so I've been scouring my force for anyone that has a Panzerfaust, and I've been moving them into the buildings on the side of the Carentan Square, just in case those Shermans make a return. I do take a casualty as that happens, though. Some Americans are being stubborn. With the Shermans gone, though, I do bring my armored car up. Its 20mm cannon should be able to help finish off the remaining Americans in the shops. So it's going to roll up and start doing exactly that. So I had noticed the sound contacts for the Shermans that left the road leading up to Carentan Square were moving around my left flank. So I'm quickly repositioning the Panzerschreck and not quite as quickly repositioning the Panzer IV, as it takes forever to make the corner. You can see kind of in the upper left corner there, the Shermans' sound contacts zipping by, and then they get spotted by infantry in a building. So it looks like my opponent has backed out of the square and is going to try and come around the other side, so I'm moving the Panzerschreck and the Panzer IV to try and intercept them. Again, let us watch as it makes an agonizingly slow rotation, trying to get in position to watch the road where I think the Shermans are going to pop around. With the Panzer IV now fully rotated and in position, there is nothing left to do but wait for the Shermans to pop around the corner, and hopefully the Panzer IV is going to see them first. As those contacts slowly come around the corner, we manage to get a spot on one, but it's actually my light machine gun team that sees them and opens fire with a quick burst and kills the commander. So at least that Sherman should be a little bit more blind. I'm hoping the Panzer IV will spot a Sherman, but none of the three tanks there manage to see each other. Those of you that have watched a few of my videos have probably realized by now I don't always have the greatest luck when it comes to my armor, and this game is going to be no exception to that. So the Panzer IV is stationary and watching for two Shermans which are moving. And it is not going to make the spot, it is not going to start aiming, and it's going to take a penetration right into the front armor. The crew is going to bail when another shell comes in. So that tank is definitely done for. However, my Panzerschreck does see the Sherman and puts a rocket into it. And then a few moments later, the Sherman crew is going to bail out. Most of the map has started to quiet down quite a bit compared to the last several turns. The crew of the Sherman that is bailed out is currently encountering some trouble with my light machine gun. And then I have some infantry in the opposite buildings that the tank drove past, which is also now going to start shooting at that crew, and another American squad that ran out of a building and is trying to cross the street. This is probably the weakest part of my defense right now, so I'm trying to bring some troops over to help shore it up, but I don't really have anyone to spare, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. 22 minutes into the battle now, and the situation around the square is continuing to not do particularly well. I am definitely wide open on the left flank. However, my opponent does try to charge some infantry into the actual objective itself. I don't think he realized that I had moved all of the squads out of the way of his Shermans when they were coming up the street, so they were hidden in the side buildings, and they make pretty short work of a couple squads that are trying to take the square itself. While all of this is happening, the rest of the map has been incredibly quiet for the last several turns. There's been no action at the cathedral or at the hospital. It's all focused around the square. At the 20-minute mark, my Stug reinforcement had arrived, so I've driven it across the map to counter those Shermans that took out my Panzer IV, and the Stug does a much better job putting multiple rounds into the Sherman. This is the one that I hit with the Panzerschreck that I actually thought I had knocked out, but I guess they managed to remount at some point when I wasn't paying attention. However, the Stug is going to just hammer it repeatedly until it is dead for good. Things have also started to calm down back around Carentan Square. There's some sporadic firefights with some remainder Americans on the opposite side of the square, but they don't seem to be posing too much of a threat. A couple squads popping up, quickly getting suppressed and disappearing from my view. The rest of the map is still incredibly quiet, so I don't know if I have killed most of the American attackers or if they're gathering for another push, but for now I am enjoying the little bit of a break here. That break is unfortunately quite brief because the Americans have received a platoon of Shermans and reinforcements, and they all appear to be driving directly into Carentan Square with guns blazing. The lead Sherman has stopped short. If it came a little bit farther, I think I have one Panzerfaust left, but this is definitely a problem. My Stug has been patiently waiting for the final Sherman on the left flank to move up, and it eventually does, and the Stug gets the spot and puts a shell through it. However, back in Carentan Square, a nightmare scenario is developing as multiple Shermans are driving directly into the square. My poor armored car doesn't get out of the way in time and takes a cannon shell. You can see in the background there I've got every squad that has a Panzerfaust running forward. I do fire the one remaining Panzerfaust I had in the building at the time, and it misses. However, the squad that has just made it into the buildings also has a Panzerfaust, and they're going to fire and get a kill on the lead, well, it was the lead Sherman. However, there are still 3 Shermans in the square, and I believe at this point I have no Panzerschrecks left, and I think I have maybe 2 Panzerfausts on the entire field. So this is crisis levels here for holding Carentan Square, and we can see those Shermans are just annihilating my squads. Very, very bad position to be in for me. Don't really have a whole lot left that can deal with these 3 Shermans and some of the infantry in the buildings that have been getting hammered by tank rounds. I've given them orders to flee, but due to being pinned so heavily and some of them breaking morale, they are cowering instead of getting out of there. So unfortunately, they are just going to stand there until they're all killed, as the buildings are going to start collapsing around them under all the cannon fire. Well, at this point, it definitely looks like Carentan Square has fallen. I've once again scoured the map for anything that can help me here, and I did find I had one Panzerschreck left. It's the one that had helped counter the Shermans in the back alley. So I'm moving them as close to the buildings as I can in order to get them into line of sight of these 3 Shermans. I don't really think they're going to take out all 3 Shermans, but maybe they'll get one. I've also brought my Stug up, and it is parked just around the corner, hoping that maybe a Sherman will stray forward and get a side shot on it. The Panzerschreck does immediately get their morale broken. However, they will recover and manage to fire a single rocket, which doesn't penetrate. Hits the upper right hull on the Sherman and doesn't get any damage in. Unfortunately, they are very easily spotted and come under heavy fire from all 3 Shermans. On the right of the square, a tank round collapses another building, killing several members of the squad inside. Somehow I managed to not get a recording of turn 29, so I can briefly describe what happened. In Carentan Square, several of the Shermans actually backed away, leaving only 1 Sherman in the square, the others redeploying somewhere else. So I've decided to take advantage of that and started to move my Stug around the corner. I figure a Stug versus a Sherman at close range, Stug has better armor and a better gun, so it should have an advantage, and I really don't have a whole lot of other options, so I try to go with the bold strategy. So my Stug charges forward, fires, gets a partial penetration at close range, takes the return shot, and is knocked out in 1 hit. Definitely not what I wanted to have happen there. And that Sherman is going to slowly back away, continuing to fire into my Stug. Was really hoping the Stug would get the upper hand there, but my luck with armor is not always great. However, I do have just 1 or 2 infantry left in the side buildings, and the next group of Americans that come around that corner are going to get greeted by some MG42 fire. So, as of now, my opponent still does not have Carentan Square because he doesn't have any units inside the objective. So there's a small chance I may be able to keep him from getting the points for that objective. While the church has been quiet for quite some time, one of the reinforcement Shermans, this is one that was in Carentan Square, it backed out and is now heading towards the cathedral area, starts to put some cannon fire up into the church tower. My machine gun does go down, but he was completely out of ammo at this point, and I'm going to be looking to get the rest of my troops out of that spire now. The disaster over at Carentan Square seems to have calmed down for a moment, so we hop back over to the hospital side, where after around 10 or so turns of nothing happening, some American forces are trying to get across the courtyard and back into the building. I do have some defenders in the outermost row of buildings at this point, just 1 squad, and they get a few kills as the Americans have moved up, and I believe they were going to try to blast the wall, but got interrupted. So instead, they are now trying to crawl into the little side entrance to get in via that route. Unfortunately, they're not having a very good time of it as my infantry continues to shoot them through the windows. So the Americans that are making another attempt on the hospital are not having much success with it. The guys right outside the walls that I think were trying to blast it are now fleeing. The small group that made it into the side building come under fire from my defenders that are in the next row of buildings, and they very quickly take a bunch of casualties and start to flee as well. The ones that are just lying down in the open there, that's I think 2 guys, one with an MP40 or an MG42, just continuing to fire on them. Overall, not too concerned with this little push. I don't think I'll have any trouble repelling it and keeping control of the hospital objective. However, back in Carentan Square, the Shermans have reappeared, having backed off and then now come back, and they are just going to decide to continuously shoot at the wreck of my poor Stug. Very unnecessary kicking it while it's already down there. My single soldier left with an MG42 is going to fire a few bursts Yet another building collapses, and then my last guy goes down. Since I can tell the American morale is in extremely fragile condition, I'm sending some troops up to go into the building and clear out the rest of the Americans. They're likely to either surrender or be pinned almost immediately, so I shouldn't have too much trouble clearing them out. And in fact, that is exactly what we're seeing here. First couple bursts of fire, both the soldiers inside are going to dive to the ground, and then it's only a matter of time until my troops are able to finish them off. So it seems like a bit of a last-ditch effort to try and get onto the objective. It didn't quite work out, as I still have quite a few troops left in the area. And we see a final guy get spotted in the doorway, and they are both removed. Back in the square, my Panzerschreck that has been in emotional distress for the last several turns, curled up on the floor, has kind of recovered his nerve, and he is going to get one last heroic effort in here as he takes aim and puts a Panzerschreck shot directly into the front of Sherman, and it is going to set it on fire, and the crew is going to bail out. Unfortunately, my Panzerschreck was spotted, and he is going to get taken out by some enemy infantry there, but great heroic effort from him at the end, making sure that, once again, my opponent still does not control Carentan Square. Neither do I, but at least my opponent doesn't have it either. As the final minutes of the game wind down, I have a platoon leader that is valiantly trying to hold back some American infantry. I think there's just one or two guys left in that squad. Otherwise, I'm pretty much cleared out on this side of the map, and there's not really a whole lot else I can do other than watch as the timer slowly ticks down. In the final turn of the game, the last remaining American that attempted to get into the hospital in the push at the end has decided to surrender. But other than that, not a whole lot happens in the final turn. Some sporadic gunfire still around the map, but overall I've managed to keep control of the hospital for virtually the entire game, only getting the outer buildings infiltrated for a short time. The cathedral did take some fire from some Shermans, but other than that, was largely defended. My biggest issues were in Carentan Square, where I had attackers coming from multiple angles up the back alley from the front road and the side buildings. That proved just a little bit too much for my defenders to handle. And with that, the timer has expired, leading us to the end of the game. It is a German army major victory. I had 60 men okay, 77 men killed, 54 wounded. I had 1 surrender, 2 tanks lost, and an armored vehicle lost, compared to the Americans, who had 130 men okay, 174 killed, 65 wounded, 1 surrender, and 6 tanks lost. Overall, massive amount of casualties on the American side. A lot of times where they were running straight forward towards machine gun fire and getting cut down in large groups. And with that, round 1 of the Utah Beach tournament is wrapped up. I greatly enjoyed both scenarios, attacking and defending. And of course, a big thank you to my opponent, OgrishVet, who put up a great fight in both games, and I look forward to playing him again, which, in fact, I do in the Cold War tournament. We meet in round 2. So in the future, you will hopefully be able to see videos of me playing OgrishVet once again in Cold War. Thanks for watching, everyone.